Hi, this is Robert Clinkenbeard and David Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes of your life to deliver some amazing content from accomplished leaders and business owners to provide you some value, to help you scale your business, to become a better father, and push yourself to higher goals personally. We hope you really enjoy these shows, and we really encourage you to share this with your friends and network to help share these messages. I'm super excited to announce a new partnership we have with Site Recon. If you're tired of measuring properties, the Site Recon platform fully automates the measurements so you can then focus on sales. Think measurements, think Site Recon. This is Robert Clinkenbeard with the Commercial Landscapers Podcast. My co-host can't be here with me today, David Anderson, but really excited to be joined by Rachid Zahidi. Rachid is the CEO of Sentinel, background checks and president of Sentinel Data Retrieval. He is the author of the book, The Business Immunity System, the Pitfalls and Side Effects of Data Handling, Privacy Issues and Background Checks. He's also currently serving as Learning Chair for EO Tampa and served in many other roles. So really appreciate you stepping up and taking on all those roles in EO. I'm a big fan of EO, being a part of it for 11 years. So I know the work involved in being part of those positions. So thank you, Rachid, for joining me.
Thank you. And likewise, Robert. I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
So tell me a little bit more about, you in terms of how did you get into the business of doing background checks? Because it's something I hear. Unfortunately, I don't hear many companies using it, but I'm sure you're going to educate us today on why we should be using that.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we are concerned with maximizing value, minimizing risk, and of course maintaining control, so the wheels don't come off.
Yep.
So to say.
True.
Yeah. So to answer your other question, how I got into it, I always had an entrepreneurial, draw to entrepreneurship from being a kid. Growing up, I was, buying and candy, breaking it up, selling it to other kids, and I was raising bunnies and selling them. And as you know, many of us EOers have stories like that. But ultimately, made my way through different industries. And one of the last corporate gigs that I had was leading a team of analysts. We were doing anti-money laundering investigations for Citigroup. And so I was approached about investing in a background check startup. And that's kind of how it all started. And I was initially just going to be an investor, silent investor. And then little by little, I found myself doing more and more until I got to a point basically where I decided to acquire all interests in it and then just scale it from there. So that's the shorter story.
No, I like that. It's a great story. So now you've been, I suppose, in full control of that business now for how long?
Oh, it's about 12 years now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just out of interest, I mean, when you obviously being an investor versus you actually running the company is a completely different scenario. So what are some of the challenges that you faced when you first took over that business?
You mean in general, as far as entrepreneurship?
Yeah, entrepreneurship. Just whether it be sales issues, whether it be people issues. What are some of the things you uncovered?
Yeah, absolutely. Like all of those. I mean, it's like there were financial. There was because I bootstrapped and basically burned the ships, cashed in the 401k, did everything and that was putting a lot on the line and. Typically to leave a cushy kind of corporate, the umbrella of the security of the corporate to go and do something like that. So obviously I had to be very careful with that. And then as we were scaling, I had to figure out that piece of the puzzle, the financial aspect of it and how to finance the growth, because always most of the times the bills come before you get paid. So because clients, especially B2B, they usually want longer terms. And but on the other hand is of course the people issue. The egg or the chicken first. You go get the business or go get the people. And then so that was, I recall that one being just had to be very resourceful initially and to be very, very picky about the first one or two additional employees were super key, because if they weren't right, it was just going to be difficult to scale. So I recall having to just take different pieces. I go get the business, go meet it on the other side. And then I had to kind of start training people to say, okay, now I can hand the business over so I can continue to do more business development, can continue to do client services, can continue to do, marketing, and have time to breathe and have time to strategize and to actually work on the business instead of in the business.
Okay.
So those are some of the things from the early days. But as you know, there's so many aspects to it. From all of the aspects of the financial, the people, the strategy, the marketing, and all the different blocks that you're very familiar with, especially working with scaling and helping other companies, scale.
Yep. And, we've obviously been going through some pretty challenging times with the pandemic over the last year. And I think, I personally think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs and people jumping into making acquisitions, or maybe jumping from the corporate world into buying companies. When you look back at, how you jumped into the business and some of the things you did, is there any, I suppose, 2 or 3 things that you found being really successful that you wanted to share, or maybe even that you would do differently next time?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's like I'm reminded of that. I think it comes from sports, where it's like don't let success get to your head, and don't let failure get to your heart. Kind of. I remember, like, of course, the times where it was very challenging. It's really easy to give up. It's really easy to kind of talk yourself out of things, of going and facing challenges and going and solving problems. And I remember one of our penetration strategies early on was to tackle the areas and the jurisdictions, because we started out doing wholesale in our industry, which means we were doing criminal searches for other background check companies. And there were just certain areas that other wholesale companies were not addressing because they were too, difficult. So we started with those, and we took on those challenges. And then, of course, as we took those from clients, then they say, okay, well, if you're able to solve these, we're going to give you the rest of the stuff. So it was just that, I guess, going bold, like a la EO kind of way. And then just, so I remember that being able to like kind of just have that tenacity early on, self-belief, and being able to stick with it. And also the other thing I remember is that when we had the initial success, and we made like the business journal Fast 50, and we were getting all these accolades and for the companies to watch and whatnot, there was a point there where we could have derailed a little bit, just because we were having such a great time, and we started forgetting a little bit some of the key aspects and some of the things that we were doing before that got us to that point, because it's easy to forget all the things that worked. And for a lot of people, like success is a poor teacher. And so so one of the lessons I learned is that also, as you're succeeding, to look at what has worked to bring you to that point, and to stay hungry and to continue to do that. And I'll give you an example. I was like relentless in going for follow-up and going for sales and going for following up with people. And then as we were more successful, there was a little bit of that arrogance to where it's like, well, we're successful now, we shouldn't be pursuing people, they should be pursuing us, right? There was like a little bit of that, or me as a CEO, I shouldn't be doing, I should. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You're almost taking the foot off the gas a little bit.
Right, exactly. So I remember that. Now, of course, like also taking the eyes off of the KPIs and the financials, and which we should always keep an eye on, because obviously the expense creep is something that happens in our personal lives. It happens in our business lives. So some of the habits and some of the tools that I kind of instilled from that point is to like watch for that expense creep, and periodically to review every expense that's coming out. Is it really necessary? Does it make sense? Or was it a vanity purchase? And that reminds me of another lesson, is that like any investment, does it make sense for us? Does it make sense for us to take out a big ad in the biggest magazine? Is there a return tied to that, or is that a vanity decision, right? So I'm reminded of the other lesson, which is revenue is vanity, profits are sanity, and of course, cash is king.
Yep, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And and I think probably, I was the same way, that sometimes you don't learn those things early on in business. Sometimes takes a few knocks, or maybe being part around some other business owners before it finally sinks in. So,
Right.
but no, I mean, I love that phrase. Love
Yeah.
that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah. As they say, the school of hard knocks, the tuition is high.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
So, as you grew your business, and you obviously went through all the typical challenges in growing your business. I mean, what are some of the? I mean, as I touched on before, I mean, I do personality assessments. I go in and analyze people within companies, trying to make sure they're all A players. Um, I don't feel as though companies invest a lot of time or have a real concrete strategy in hiring people, even though it's our biggest complaint, either having not the right people, or having a funnel full of people. But I just don't feel as though they have that, do all the due diligence they need to do when pulling an employee. I mean, obviously, a lot of them do the typical,
Mhm.
the interview part, but there's the assessment,
Right.
there's,
There's
and you obviously the
verifications. Yeah.
background, yeah,
Mhm.
certification, there's the background check. So talk about some of the things that the discussions you've had, or maybe just some of the worst case scenarios you've come across, without obviously sharing any company names.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, of course, we're one of the big components of that initial due diligence process. But of course, it's not all of it, because I mean, as you mentioned, the interviews, the assessments, and of course, attracting the right candidates, and making sure that you're hiring with a strategy. You have a strategy for hiring, because there are all kinds of people that they may be good people, but they may not be good for you. Just because they're good people, it doesn't always necessarily mean they're good for you.
Yeah.
So I always tell the people, like, to screen in and to screen out. So it's about the due diligence, it's about the background checks, it's all about all of that, but it's also about the skills, because you can hire someone who's never done anything in that regard, but is also a dud, so hasn't accomplished anything either. So
Yeah.
they may have never gotten into trouble, but they've never did anything either. So I try to tell people, okay, try to approach it in a balanced manner with an objective. As far as the one component, with the verifications and background checks, unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't come to that until something bad happens. This is not everybody, but of course, for a lot of people, until they get burned, there are people who haven't come until someone got arrested in front of their workplace. An
Right.
employee that was about to walk into a client, because it's one of those where they go into people's homes, and they got arrested right outside of the clients. Can you imagine what the client
Oh,
felt?
wow.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine when they called, the employer, what it was like? Numerous ones where there's been embezzlement, where the candidate shows up. There's so many of them that it's basically like you start seeing a pattern where a candidate is great at interviewing, they show up, they look the part, they play the part, and they're very good at charming the business owner or the person who's responsible for hiring. They get into a sensitive position, especially financial or any position where they can do a lot of damage. And by the time the employer sobers up to it, they've already embezzled anything from 50 grand to 150. We've heard of 250 before they found out. And most of the times, by the time the employer found out, that person has already jumped ship. They've already left.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's been many examples of that. And a lot of people just don't think about how small of an insurance that is to take that time initially. Hiring in desperation barely ever works out. So it's good to take the time, because what you end up doing is you churn through a ton of people, which gives you headaches. When the wrong hire is made, no one wins. The employer doesn't win. The applicant doesn't win. No one wins. So I always say that to people, both applicants and both employers. So I think it's on both of them to come into these conversations really with clear expectations and being as transparent as possible. That being said, the onus is on as employers to check and to do our due diligence, because obviously there are liabilities, there's reputational risk. There's, of course, goes straight to the bottom line, is the wrong hire can cost anything from 1 year's salary to 3 times the salary of that position, just for making the wrong hire, because of all the costs associated with the switching, and not to mention the opportunity cost, depending on the position, assuming there hasn't been damage done, while the wrong hire was in there, whether it was workplace violence, whether assault on a client, whether it was embezzlement or other damage.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true because, obviously most cases the clients are hiring you because they put in that belief, they put in that trust in you. And, if you get into a scenario where, you hire an employee with some type of dubious background, then you're definitely breaking that trust and exposing yourself in many, many different ways. I mean, it happened to me. I've had at least one or two employees in the past who, have embezzled. And, one of the challenges I found is that, I was thinking, well, I'll just call the police and they'll come in and take care of them and, do whatever that needs to be done. But even then there's some, I don't know, resistance or just a lot of work in trying to get that person prosecuted. So, we definitely at that point, unfortunately we got burned. We then started looking at providing background checks. Well, I mean, talk to the audience, Rachid, about what does that process look like? I mean, can be done in half a day? Can it be like a 24-hour turnaround? I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand the
Certainly.
process.
Yes, certainly, Robert. I'm sorry that you had to go, to go through that. And we always say to people, I mean, you have to make an informed decision. You have the right to make an informed decision. And I also like to say to people that it doesn't always necessarily mean that if someone had a particular run-in with the law before, depending on how long ago it is and what's the nature of the offense, it doesn't necessarily automatically disqualify them. It just allows you to have that conversation, because there are instances where someone has made a mistake a long time ago and they've learned from it, and as a result they've become a better person. However, what you don't want is not to ever even know. And I also say to the applicants, if you have something, be upfront about it, because it gives you the opportunity to have that discussion with the employer and to tell them, okay, this is what happened. I own up to it. I learned from it. I want a chance, I want a second chance, and you can convince them, because otherwise, if you lie, then you automatically get disqualified. So I just wanted to make sure I note that, because a lot of times one of the mistakes people make is that thinking that, okay, just if someone, made a mistake before, they're automatically a bad person. That's not necessarily what we're saying. We're just saying you have the right to make an informed decision, get all the data, get all the information, then so you can look at the rest of the pieces of the puzzle and you can make an informed decision. Now, circling back to what a typical background check is and what the turnaround is, it depends on the product. So one of the main components is identity checks. And identity checks, obviously, starting from when you check the IDs yourself to make sure you're looking at the right person and at the right identity. We also do what's called the social security trace, which allows us to uncover any aliases or AKAs that the person has used. It lets us know all the different places they have lived, so that we make sure we go search those places as well, those counties, because at times the best way to go is to go search at least those counties, in addition to additional products like a nationwide sweep, which you then go and verify whatever possible information that comes there with the source. And then there's the other verifications that includes employment, past history employment verifications, but it also includes credentials verifications for those types of positions where a diploma or where a degree or where some other kind of credential is required. We've all heard of fake diploma mills. We've heard of people, like even at the higher levels in some of the most known companies, who have misrepresented that before, or said they had a master's and they didn't. So they got, a promotion because they had a master's, but they didn't, and so there's many different ways that people can misrepresent the truth. Then, of course, the bigger component is the criminal. And then that's when we do the county criminal searches. And then we also do that nationwide sweep, and sometimes federal as well. And if you're hiring drivers, it's recommended you do the driving histories or the DMV records. And because of course, if someone is a habitual reckless driver, or is known to be driving under the influence a lot, do you want them to be driving kids around, or seniors, or anybody for that matter? No, you don't. So we want to make sure we do that. Of course, eligibility verification, you want to operate within the law, and you want to do the right thing there. And of course, depending on your policy, drug testing and drug screening for people operating heavy machinery, people operating any machinery, and for most times, most places just have a strictly drug-free workplace. And so whatever you do, you have to do it, of course, consistently. So you can't cherry pick. You can't say, okay, I'm going to do it on Robert, but I'm not going to worry about John because he looks like he's good. That's a recipe for disaster, both legally and also like common sense. It doesn't, it's not going to. And then, of course, we always recommend multiple interviews and scientific testing, like we talked about earlier, and assessment. Supplement, the gut decisions with multiple interviews, and also like some of the scientific kind of tests. Yeah.
I don't think I even realized there was so many different types of assessments that you could do, or background checks you can do. I mean, what would you see as an average turnaround for? Because obviously, again, in many markets, you're trying to get somebody in the door, you're trying to get somebody in the seat.
Yeah.
So, once you find that person you think's a good one, you're literally trying to get them in that seat pretty quickly.
Yes.
But what are you recommending in terms of that type of turnaround?
Yeah. It's a great question, Robert. It's one of the things that are top of mind for a lot of employers. And because we work with all kinds of different types of companies, including staffing companies, credit unions, moving companies, you name it. And a lot of people are always concerned with the turnaround. And the turnaround is obviously determined by which kinds of products, and of course, you are working with. So for the most of the run-of-the-mill types of products, like the SSN trays, the county criminal, and just a state or a nationwide kind of sweep, it can be anywhere from 24 hours to 48 hours to a little bit more if we have to go into some of these rural counties. Say, for instance, in some parts of Wyoming or Montana or like Kentucky, what have you, depends, or Mississippi. It depends on which jurisdictions we have to go into. So the averages range, but the majority of our people fall within 24 to 48 hours. And say, for instance, something like drug screening, there are variables in there because the applicant has to show up on time.
Yeah.
They have to go and do their part. And then, once they do their part, then the lab does their part, and then it gets back to us and to you. Let's say, okay, with the verifications, we're also like, if we're calling the references previous employers, they're not all the same. Some of them are more responsive than others, and some of them just say, for instance, have the work number, or so. It depends on some of these variables. But as far as averages are concerned, it's about 24 to 48 hours for the majority of the people, with, of course, those rare exceptions where there is something that needs to be done. Or like, for instance, in the instance of a drug screening, something came up and what's called an MRO needs to review it, a medical review officer. Say, for instance, to rule out if the person was taking some medication that may have made the test results a certain way and what have you. So there are compliance considerations to take into account. But for most of it is 24 to 48 hours.
No, that's great. You touched on something interesting in that, it's similar to when I do personality assessments with prospects or existing employees. There's never going to be somebody who's, absolutely perfect in terms of that perfect personality. There's always going to be, some blind spots, some, strong areas, but having the data in front of you to allow you to make an informed decision is a lot better than making that decision blind by something that's been done on rehearsal. So I really like your point about if you provide all that data, and if there's something perhaps on the records that's 5 or 10 or 15 years back, then you can just have that informed discussion with that employer.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's it within the, like some of the things obviously at the top level when it comes to screening, but also like in general, I think it was Jack Daly, who I'm sure you're familiar with, once said, throw,
Yeah.
why do we throw a party when people leave? Well, we never throw a party when they start. So it's
true.
important to kind of also do that for the right people and for the right employees, and to instill also accountability from the beginning. And I always tell the people, put some speed bumps in there, because sometimes we get excited. We fall in love with the personality of a hire that we're interviewing, most likely because they're the mirror effect, maybe because they remind us of ourselves or whatever. But you just want to hire a bunch of copies of you. That's probably not going to work. It's not going to cover your blind spots. And then also, like we said earlier, there's some people that are just great at charming. So you got to make sure you put those, the checklist and all the check boxes get checked every time, and that which gets measured gets done.
Yeah, so true. So true. So as we wrap up our session today, Rachid, what are any other words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience?
Well, I mean, I'd say don't rush this process. I mean, it's like for someone who has been there and made that mistake many times, it's easy to rush. It's easy to get super excited and to skip a few steps. Don't be tempted to do that. Make sure you always do all these steps, when it comes to due diligence, interviewing, assessments, everything, to make sure you check all the boxes. And also, always, this applies to everything, is reassess and review your processes every now and then. Reassess them and review them to see, are they giving you the results that you want? Are they driving the results that you want? Or do they need to be improved? Or were there lessons that need to be incorporated? And heed the lessons learned, because a lot of times is that if we don't learn from a lesson, then obviously what's the point? What's the point? So we have to learn from our lessons, and then also be kind with yourself. Obviously everybody makes mistakes. So when you make mistakes, don't let that discourage you, because we've all made those mistakes. We've all made those hiring mistakes, and obviously be resilient when it comes to this process, and continue to tweak and to better your process.
That's awesome. Thank you, Rachid. If somebody wants to get in touch with you about your business, about you personally, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Robert. They can find our main business at sbchecks.com. That's S as in Sam, B as in boy, checks.com. If they are a background check company looking for our wholesale side, it's s-retrieval.com. And you can find me on Instagram as Rachid Podcaster. Or you can just search Rachid Zahidi on Google, and my book will come up, my LinkedIn will come up, and all the other things that I'm involved with, and including EO Tampa Bay. If you're interested in EO or joining EO or finding out more about EO, you can also reach out to me about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We'll include all your links to your company and everything else in your podcast. So, Rachid, really pleasure chatting with you today. Really, thanks for sharing everything, and I'm sure our audience are going to get some great value out of your talk today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you today, and you got some great takeaways for your business or your personal life. This is Robert Clinkybeard along with David Anderson, and would love to get you and your friends to join us in our future journey. Two quick things before you go, listeners. Check out our website, commerciallandscapers.com. You can subscribe, you can share with your friends, but more importantly, check out our new sponsor, Site Recon. We're going to make your sales process, your estimating way easier, so you can spend more time in your proposals. Thanks everyone. Cheers.